Imagine the most dazzling wedding you could possibly conceive. June 9th, 1660. In Saint-Jean-d'Al, a small, picturesque town perched on the narrow strip of sand separating France and Spain. Fireworks aren't just crackling. They're exploding in vibrant bursts over the tranquil bay. Luxurious silk carpets are painstakingly laid across the docks, ensuring the bride's delicate slippers never even brush against the dirt. And as these two young figures prepare to meet, two colossal empires literally hold their breath. On one side, we have 20-year-old Louis XIV already crowned with the formidable nickname, the Sun King, extending his hand. On the other, his 17-year-old cousin, the Spanish Infanta, Maria Theresa. The preacher, caught up in the moment, declares them peace incarnate. But let's be honest, the ink on that marriage contract is still glistening wet, and it's been written in blood as much as in gold. 'Cause this isn't some fairy tale romance, is it? Not even close. This is the final brutal clause of a treaty that mercifully ended 23 grueling years of trench warfare. And the price: one woman's dowry, one woman's country, and ultimately, one woman's silence. So, stick with us, because in the next few minutes, we're going to pull back the curtain on how a single wedding night didn't just redraw the map of Europe, but fundamentally reshaped its future. We'll uncover the infuriating truth of why Spain never paid that promised 500,000 gold écus, and how that infuriating unpaid bill became Louis's absolute favorite excuse to march his armies straight into the Spanish Netherlands. We'll meet a queen who traded Madrid's quiet coves for the glittering, cutthroat mirrored halls of Versailles, only to discover, to her profound sorrow, that her greatest enemy wasn't some foreign army, but her husband's relentlessly wandering eye. By the time we're done, you'll understand exactly why historians so often call this marriage the hinge of the 17th century, and why Maria Theresa, though tragically almost forgotten by most, deserves to be remembered, not just as a pawn, but as a pivotal figure in her own right. Let's rewind a bit, shall we? Our story truly begins in 1635, when the Franco-Spanish War ignited. It was King Louis XIII of France, guided, of course, by the shrewd and utterly redoubtable Cardinal Richelieu, who audaciously declared war on his own brother-in-law, Philip IV of Spain. Can you imagine the family dinner parties? What followed wasn't a quick skirmish. It was a grinding, agonizing, trench-scarred slog that stretched across the infamous Spanish Road, that vital supply lifeline running all the way from Milan to the Low Countries. This wasn't some glorious cavalry charge. It was attrition warfare, pure and simple. Towns like Arras, Thionville, and Dunkirk became mere chess pieces, changing hands so frequently, so violently, that mapmakers found themselves printing entirely new atlases every single spring. The cost, in lives and resources, was astronomical. By 1659, both kingdoms were utterly exhausted. Spain, once the seemingly invincible global superpower, found its silver fleets from the Americas could no longer patch the gaping holes in its treasury. And France's peasants had been bled white by taxes, their fields fallow, their villages often ravaged. The grand ambitions of monarchs were paid for by the suffering of ordinary people. It was into this desperate stalemate that the ultimate peacemaker stepped forward, Cardinal Mazarin, Louis XIV's chief minister. Mazarin was a Sicilian gambler, a man who saw the grand game of European politics with the cold, calculating eyes of a financier. For him, marriage wasn't about love or even affection. It was a merger, a high-stakes deal. Risky, yes, often expensive, but potentially wildly, unbelievably profitable. So, Mazarin, with his sharp wit and even sharper political instincts, met with Spain's chief minister, Luis de Haro. Their chosen location, the tiny, wind-beaten, utterly desolate island of Pheasants, nestled precariously in the middle of the Bidasoa River, a neutral strip of land perfectly symbolizing the delicate balance they sought. For 2 intense months, between October and November 1659, they hammered out the intricate details of what would become the Treaty of the Pyrenees. The territorial swaps were, relatively speaking, the easy part. France would keep Roussillon and a portion of the Cerdagne, expanding its southern borders. Spain would retain Catalonia, south of the Pyrenees. But the truly agonizing, the truly human part was the human clause, the fate of Maria Theresa. Philip's eldest daughter, a young woman who had always known her destiny lay in dynastic duty. Had to marry Louis. And, crucially, she, had to renounce all succession rights to the Spanish crown. This wasn't just a formality. It was designed to prevent any future French claim on the vast Spanish Empire. In return for this immense sacrifice, Spain promised a staggering 500,000 gold icus. To put that into perspective, it was roughly equivalent to a full year of the French Navy's entire operating budget. A truly astronomical sum. But here's the catch, the devil in the details. The loophole that would unravel generations of peace. The renunciation was only valid if the dowry was paid. If that enormous sum of money never arrived, Louis's clever lawyers would argue the entire clause was null and void. Philip IV, desperate for peace, agreed. He was gambling, betting everything on the hope that future Spanish ministers, perhaps decades down the line, would somehow find the cash. They never did, and that, my friends, was a ticking time bomb. The day arrived, a spectacle of unmatched grandeur and underlying tension. On June 7, 1660, the young bride, Maria Theresa, crossed the river in a magnificent gilded litter, a veritable jewel box on wheels. She was escorted by no less than 600 Spanish grandees, all dressed in somber yet luxurious black velvet. A stark contrast to the colorful French court waiting across the border. Louis, ever the master showman, met her halfway across the river. In an unprecedented gesture of humility and respect, a move calculated to impress both his new bride and the Spanish delegation, he dismounted his horse and offered his hand to help her from the litter. 2 days later, the Cathedral of St. Jean d'Elz was transformed. It was draped entirely in shimmering silver cloth, catching the light and creating an ethereal glow. Maria Theresa, a vision of youthful solemnity, wore a gown so intricately embroidered with the combined arms of Bourbon and Habsburg that its train was impossibly long, requiring 12 noblemen to carry it behind her. After the sacred vows were exchanged, Louis slipped a ring onto her finger, a diamond the size of a hazelnut, sparkling amidst 8 perfectly cut rubies. The crowd, caught up in the emotion and the sheer relief of peace, erupted, cheering, "Peace, peace." But pay close attention to the small print, the subtle details that betray the true power dynamics at play. When the time came to sign the marriage register, Maria Theresa signed with her Spanish name. Maria Theresa, a quiet assertion of her identity. Louis, however, signed in French. Even in their signatures, the future of this union was announced. France would dominate. Following the lavish ceremony, the royal couple embarked on their journey, first to Paris and then on to Versailles. At this point, Versailles wasn't the sprawling, opulent palace we know today. It was still a relatively modest hunting lodge, a far cry from the grand ancient palaces of Madrid. Maria Theresa, having been raised in the deeply religious and formal Spanish court, spoke only Spanish. This was a significant barrier, but one that was briefly overcome because Louis, thanks to his own Spanish Habsburg mother, Anne of Austria, spoke Spanish fluently. For a fleeting moment, that language barrier seemed to dissolve, and courtiers, always eager for a new angle, began to whisper, "Could this pious, gentle queen actually soften the notorious Sun King?" Maria Theresa was devout, modest, and genuinely fond of quiet pursuits like embroidery and simple sweets. Qualities that stood in stark contrast to the often cynical, flamboyant, and politically charged atmosphere of the French court. Louis, perhaps genuinely flattered by her adoration and youthful innocence, seemed to reciprocate, at least initially. He spent September evenings in her apartments, playing his guitar and singing Spanish villancicos. And almost immediately, she became pregnant. For a precious heartbeat, it truly looked like a genuine partnership, a chance for affection to bloom. Then came the winter of 1661, and with it, a seismic shift. Cardinal Mazarin, the architect of the marriage and the guiding hand of Louis's early reign, died. Louis, now a confident 22, seized the moment. He shocked the court by announcing he would rule without a chief minister, consolidating all power into his own hands. Simultaneously, he made a grand pronouncement. He would transform Versailles from a mere hunting lodge into a magnificent, glittering stage, where every noble was not just a courtier, but an actor in his grand drama. It was into this evolving, increasingly theatrical court that Louise de la Vallière entered. A modest, unassuming maid of honor to the Duchess of Orleans, she was everything Maria Theresa wasn't: vivacious, French, and utterly captivating to the young king. Louis fell hard, and his infidelity wasn't a private, whispered affair. It was a public performance. Louise was brazenly given rooms directly above the queen's. Courtiers, ever observant, would wake to find the king's candle still burning outside Louise's door at dawn, a blatant signal of his whereabouts. Maria Theresa, 6 months pregnant at the time, pretended not to notice, her dignity a fragile shield against the crushing humiliation. She wrote to her father, a simple, heartbreaking confession: "My duty is to pray." The response from Spain was equally stark, devoid of comfort. "Your duty is to produce an heir," and she did. On November 1st, 1661, she gave birth to Louis de France, the Grand Dauphin. The succession was secure, a crucial political victory. But the marriage, barely 2 years old, had already cracked, irreparably damaged by the king's public affections for another. As the years drifted by, that promised 500,000 gold écus from Spain never materialized. Not a single coin. Louis XIV, always itching for glory and territorial expansion, saw his moment. He had a casus belli, a perfect excuse. In 1667, he convened the Chambre de Justice, a special court, and posed a seemingly innocent question to his most learned lawyers. Did the unpaid dowry invalidate Maria Theresa's renunciation of her succession rights? The answer, as Louis undoubtedly orchestrated, was a resounding, legally convenient yes. That May, his armies, well-trained and eager, poured into the Spanish Netherlands. This was a strategically vital territory, a rich and fertile land that served as a crucial buffer between the burgeoning French power and the rest of Europe. The conflict, known as the War of Devolution, lasted 18 months. France, with its superior military, quickly captured key cities like Lille, Courtrai, and Charleroi. However, this aggressive expansion alarmed other European powers. A formidable triple alliance comprising England, Sweden, and the Dutch Republic quickly formed, forcing Louis to return most of his gains at the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. But the message was crystal clear. France was now the aggressor, a force to be reckoned with, and marriage vows, it seemed, were just another convenient tool of diplomacy, easily manipulated for political gain. Maria Theresa, caught in an agonizing position between her husband and her birth family, said nothing publicly. But privately, her confessor noted, she wept. She kept a miniature of her father, Philip IV, under her pillow, kissing it each night, a silent testament to her divided loyalties and profound loneliness. By 1670, Versailles was no longer a modest hunting lodge. It was complete, a dazzling, overwhelming monument to Louis XIV's absolute power. Mirrored halls reflected endless light, fountains danced with intricate precision, and an etiquette so rigid, so suffocating, was enforced that courtiers literally fought for the privilege of handing the queen her chemise. Maria Theresa, the Spanish infanta, found herself trapped in this gilded cage, surviving by clinging to an unyielding routine. Her days were a predictable cycle of piety and quiet domesticity. She'd wake at 8, attend Mass, breakfast on her customary chocolate and bread, a nostalgic taste of Spain, and then spend 4 long hours at her embroidery frame. She did learn French, eventually, but her thick Spanish accent lingered, a constant reminder of her foreignness. The ladies of the court, ever cruel, would mock her behind their fans, their whispers a constant background hum to her existence. Louis, the Sun King, would visit her apartments perhaps once a week, and only then on formal evenings when court etiquette demanded the royal couple dine together. Their conversations were polite, distant, revolving around trivialities like the price of lace or the health of their only surviving son, the Dauphin. After dessert, with barely a glance, Louis would escort his current maître d'hôtel to a smaller, brighter table, leaving Maria Theresa to retire alone. Her only companions in her solitary retreat were her beloved dwarves and 2 spaniels, touchingly named after Castilian towns she would never, ever see again. Between 1662 and 1672, Maria Theresa gave Louis 6 children's 3 princesses. This was her primary duty, her paramount contribution to the French crown, and she fulfilled it dutifully, painfully. Yet, the brutal realities of 17th-century life meant that only one, the Grand Dauphin, would survive to adulthood. The others succumbed to smallpox, measles, or the convulsions common to the era, each tiny coffin a fresh wound in her heart. Each loss hollowed her further, stripping away a piece of her already fragile spirit. Yet, she clung to rituals, to anything that offered a glimmer of hope or control. She ordered every cradle lined with scarlet wool, a Spanish custom because Spanish midwives insisted it warded off fevers. When her last child, the Duchess of Valois, died at the tender age of 2, the Queen, ever stoic, did not cry in public. Instead, she sought solace in faith, sponsoring a convent and spending entire days praying before the relic of Saint Genevieve. Even after decades in France, courtiers still referred to her, often dismissively, as the Spanish Infanta, as if her marriage, her children, and her crown had never quite managed to transfer her identity to make her truly French. July 1683. Louis was once again campaigning in the Spanish Netherlands, pursuing his relentless territorial ambitions. Maria Theresa, left behind at Versailles, contracted a painful abscess in her arm. Gangrene swiftly set in. Her surgeons, desperate, recommended amputation. But Maria Theresa, with a quiet dignity that had defined her entire life, refused. A queen, she declared, must enter heaven intact. On July 30th, she received her final communion, asked for a Spanish priest, and, in her last moments, whispered the names of her beloved dead children. Louis, racing back from the front, arrived too late. She was 45 years old. Louis, ever concerned with appearances, ordered a period of court mourning, but the veneer of grief was thin. He had already moved his new mistress, the formidable Madame de Maintenon, into rooms adjacent to his own. In Madrid, the bells tolled mournfully for the Infanta, who had left her homeland so young and never came home. In Paris, pamphlets praised her patience, her piety, her Spanish resignation, a backhanded compliment that underscored her perceived passivity, and Louis, within mere months, he coldly used her death to press fresh dynastic claims on the Spanish throne, setting Europe squarely on the path to the devastating War of the Spanish Succession. So, what did this grand, politically charged wedding truly buy? For France, it bought 23 invaluable years of peace, a crucial period that allowed Louis XIV to centralize his absolute power, to transform Versailles into an architectural marvel, and to forge the formidable armies that would dominate the next century of European warfare. For Spain, it offered a temporary shield, a brief respite, but ultimately, it accelerated the slow, painful bleed of its European territories, a testament to its declining power. And for Europe as a whole, it forged a brutal new playbook. Marriage contracts became thinly veiled pretexts for invasion, and unpaid dowries were weaponized, transformed into declarations of war. And for Maria Theresa herself, she received a crown of diamonds that year by year must have felt heavier and heavier. Her life became a quiet, enduring struggle, translating sorrow into prayer, and her legacy, for too long, has been reduced to a mere footnote in most textbooks. Yet, without her wrenching renunciation, without the dowry that never came, without her silent, dignified endurance, there is no Sun King in full, blinding blaze. History might remember Louis, the Grand Monarch, but let's also remember the Infanta, the quiet queen who paid a bill she never owed, and whose sacrifices paved the way for a new era of French dominance. If this story of velvet, vengeance, and unpaid invoices grabbed you, then don't be a stranger. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Do you think Louis was a genius strategist or just a royal deadbeat with impeccable timing? Next week, we're unpacking how another forgotten queen, Maria Theresa of Austria, used her own daughters as poker chips in the ruthless game of European alliances. You won't want to miss it. Tap the bell so you actually get notified.